You can just put it on there for me, Hal.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the regular meeting of the Clay Township Board. Today is Tuesday, April 22nd. Our first order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. Mary?
Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next up is an approval of minutes from our March 18th regular board meeting. Do I have a motion?
I so move.
Second.
Is there any discussion?
They were shorter than usual, but very concise. Thank you.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion will carry. Do we have any public comments today? No public comments. We have one action item today, and that is a resolution number 2014-04-2201, Township Board approving the trustee to discuss with the city on interlocal cooperation agreement, reference fire construction project. Brian, should I read it?
No,
Okay, not necessary?
no.
All right.
But if you're prepared to discuss that, whatever order you want, Mr. Chairman, but if you're prepared to discuss it, it would be appropriate to move the motion and second it and then open the discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. Is there a motion for this action item?
I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Now discussion. Brian, do you want to talk about this?
Sure. There's a variety of folks that are here to speak this morning. So good morning. Sorry that Doug can't be with you. He's excited about this project, I can tell you that. There have been a number of planning meetings that have included members of my firm, members of Crow Horwath, and Angie Stino is here this morning to talk about the process and the finances for a joint public safety project between Clay Township and the city of Carmel. As a couple of you know who've been around here for a while, we've done this before. And we entered into a joint agreement some 15 years ago now to construct two fire stations, which are currently operated by and within the limits of the city of Carmel. Didn't used to be, but they are today. And we've talked about the best means of accomplishing a project which includes, which was presented to you for discussion purposes at your last meeting. I wasn't present. Tom DeRue was, so I got a full briefing. For the removal and replacement of station number 44, the updating and renovation of station number 43, and then a new emergency operations center, training facility, and repair shop. So we've walked through the process of how the township would accomplish this in conjunction with the city, and we have a few items for you if you want to see those. We've done a tentative timeline on the actions necessary.
Thank you.
And I would, just because I don't know if the city's been fully briefed on this, I would ask that we kind of keep this among ourselves at the moment. Okay, good. And because I don't know what spade work has been done with the city elected officials yet, and I know Doug was in the process of that, and some of you have been as well. So this is start to finish. Major items include the adoption of an interlocal cooperation agreement, which we do not have to present to you today. We have a resolution authorizing the trustee to proceed on the items we're going to talk about today. He doesn't want to get far out ahead of the Township Board unless you all are part of this desire as well. So it would be an interlocal cooperation agreement similar to the one that we entered into 15 years ago with the city, by which the city would agree to allow the township to place a debt levy, essentially, across the city's jurisdiction and the townships. We've done this now 2 times previously, once for the fire stations and once for the Monon Center in Central Park. The agreement would also provide for some of the details of the facility's construction, operation, and ultimately who would be the owner of the facility at the end of a 20-year period through a lease purchase. The timeline that we've put together for you includes the creation of a municipal building corporation, similar to how we did the Monon Center for financing purposes. The nonprofit building corporation would be the owner of the facility, would actually be the constructor of it, but they would do so under an agreement with the township, which would, in conjunction with the city, direct the operations. And at the end of construction, the building corporation would be the owner of the 3 facilities and would lease the facilities back to the township, which would pay rental payments to the building corporation to fund a bond issue that was issued by the building corporation, secured by the lease payments. There would then be a sublease, and it may just be handled in the interlocal cooperation agreement, for the city to operate the facilities just as they do the facilities that we have jointly today. Some of the items that are highlights here include the first step really is to be sure everyone's on the same page before the township gets too far down the line by negotiating and approving an interlocal cooperation agreement. Other than the authorizing resolution today to say, go and come back to us, that would be the first step for the appropriate folks to sit down together, walk through the process to be sure that the city and the township were on the same page. We would create, form, and activate the nonprofit building corporation. The building corporation would take some preliminary actions with respect to the bond issue to get the program going. There is a process by which a unit like the township has to go through to enter into a long-term lease. We went through this in the Monon Center. 50 signatures of taxpayers presented to the township board, lease authorized, this type of thing. So the township board would be very actively involved in this process and actually be the approver of virtually every step. The building corporation would approve a lease, you all would approve a lease, and based on that approved lease, with Crow Horwath's assistance, the building corporation would then issue bonds that would be privately negotiated for sale to finance the construction of the buildings. The buildings, because despite the fact that they have private ownership, in quotes, because the building corporation is essentially an arm of the township, you would go through the normal public bidding process. It would be just like the township itself was constructing these facilities, although technically it would be in control of the building corporation. So the folks that you pick for the building corporation are important, just like the folks that you picked for the building corporation for the Monon Center, but everyone worked through that process very well together. A few things that at the very end of this timeline, and I'll leave this with you, I'm going to call it draft, because we may look through, Crow Horwath may look through and say, oh, we got one more step here, we may see another step or two. We go through this very detailed process just as really as much a checklist as it is a timetable to be sure that we've covered every statutory step in a bond issue to support our opinion on the bonds. But architect selection is important. There's some preliminary discussions and suggestions have been made. That's critical because one of the key steps here is having not necessarily construction plans, but estimates, firm estimates of the costs of construction. And right now, we just have discussion concepts, no concept drawings, no schematics, nothing like that. So that's something that needs to be on the front burner. There will be some details on property ownership that have to be worked through for the building corporation to issue bonds and lease property. It must be the fee owner of those properties. So just as we transferred the township condemned, ultimately acquired by negotiation in the condemnation proceeding, the Monon Center property, and then transferred it to the building corporation, we will have to go through the same process here. It'll be a little bit more complicated because the city owns at least one of these properties. Another one for the emergency center has been discussed. Maybe the school has some property they would either exchange or contribute. So we'll work through all those. Tom DeRue's our real estate expert, so He's worked through worse issues than that, so we'll get all that figured out. Just a lot of details on our end. Should be seamless on yours with respect to those headaches for us. But that's the general process, so discussion at some point, and it's not being presented today, but architect selection, getting an architect on board to get things estimated and concepts to be presented to you all, fleshing out some of the details that I know that the chief has in mind and the elected officials have in mind, and then proceed with that process. That was more than just the resolution. The resolution itself, do you have copies before you?
Yes.
Okay. The resolution yourself essentially just authorizes, and technically, the trustee could go ahead and do these things without your approval, but Doug didn't want to do that. The trustee wanted to be sure that this was an effort that the board approved and was on board with. So this resolution essentially says we're on board to proceed with the planning, go and have discussions and negotiate with the city of Carmel, the interlocal cooperation agreement, go and retain the accountants, the lawyers, and the architect and designers to help with the process and get the ball rolling. Everything has to come back, everything with the exception of the hiring of professionals has to come back to you. No lease without your approval. No property acquisition without your approval. No interlocal cooperation agreement, which is critical for the township-wide rate to pay the leases without your approval. The statute does provide that the executive can hire architects, lawyers, financial consultants, but Doug wants to talk about those with you as well, and I think he's had some preliminary discussions also. So with that, hope that wasn't too long of an explanation, Mr. Chairman, but happy to answer questions. Angie dragged herself out over protests this morning as well, and I'm kidding. But we did have a discussion about the need for coffee if it was going to be a 7 o'clock meeting, so Debbie took care of that. But we're happy to address any of your issues or questions about this, and then I know the public safety folks have some thoughts as well.
Matt, why don't you start off?
Well, I've got a lot of comments on everything you just said.
Okay.
But I'm not sure how much this actually pertains to the resolution.
Okay?
So I don't know if we want to discuss some of this or.
Whatever you want. Absolutely.
Well, okay. One, I think we do have bridging documents. We have plans that were drawn up in 2006 that would be functional for both fire stations if we choose to go along with number 3. So plans are done, or they're close enough that anybody could go in and tweak them and bring them up to speed. We're talking about it seems like you're talking about a design bid build process. I personally think that's the wrong approach. I think we should do a design build process. I think it should be a qualification-based RFP based on numbers. And in the design build process, which the state allowed several years ago, we say, here's what we want, here's how much you want to pay for it, bidders, who's going to build it for us? And in that process, there's no wiggle room for change orders. There's no, unless you do a major square footage design change, you have one person responsible for the entire project, meaning a construction firm, whether it's Schmidt, or Shield Sexton, F.A. Wilhelm. There's a whole bunch of them. They all have lots and lots of fire department experience. They can then assemble their team based on input from us. If we want, usually we want them to pick local firms, but they may have a firm. I know there's a huge firm in Cincinnati that exclusively does fire stations. So that's what I want to have discussion about is getting away from the design, bid, build, which is time-consuming and wasteful, and there's too much margin for error and too many people involved. It really should be, in my opinion, and I do this for a living, enter an agreement with a construction manager who would do the design build process. The design would be just a little bit ahead of the build. We would break ground months and months and months ahead of the typical way of doing it, and cost containment is there. So if we've got some preliminary numbers, and if it says here we're going to spend $6 million, we can say okay, Station 4, we want a 12,000 square foot facility. We want it to look like this. Here are some plans. We're going to spend $2 million on it. Who's going to build it? And I think that process is much more fiscally sound than giving contractors the opportunity to bid and fluff and do everything else, because I'm on the other side of it, and I'm going to do this for a living. So that's what I want to talk about. And we can limit the RFP to put in some requirements for bidders and say, okay, you must have worked on X amount of fire stations in the past. You must use local, at least 20% local firms or 50% local firms. If we want to throw a DBE goal in there, minority-owned, woman-owned, whatever, we can. But I think that is the most prudent process to get a project built, and that's what I would like to see.
Do you want me to?
Go
A few
ahead.
comments on that. Okay, I appreciate that. And that'll be entirely up to the board and the executive to make that decision. I do this for a living too, and I've gone through probably 65 or 70 public building projects as the attorney, the documenter, and in many cases the litigator after the fact. I'm not a fan of design build. I'm not absolutely against it either. I've been brought in to clean up design build projects in Hancock County, Shelby County, and Hendricks County after the fact, and it depends on who's selected. The thing I like about design, bid, build is you've got an architect and a contractor looking at each other, and in not in adverse, but at least with different perspectives, with the contract or the architect representing the owner, and rather than the owner either being on their own or having an outside construction manager that tries to manage the architect and the builder who are on the same side of the table. So it depends on the project. That was rejected on the prior to the fire station double build. It was rejected on Monon. Not I shouldn't say rejected. It wasn't selected. That's a better way to say it, Matt. So, but that's up to you all. Now you do have to have independent individuals on a committee that approves specifications. Can't be the board here. It has to be an independent group that approves specifications, creates specifications. One of those has to be an architect or an engineer. So you have, and nobody does that. My experience has been, you might be able to find someone to do that as a volunteer for the township. My experience is it's a paying gig for someone on the independent committee to create those specifications. So I don't disagree with what you're saying. I'm just saying there's a counterpoint to it as well. In some cases, it's worked out very well. I'm not a fan of it, but I've been through the projects, good and bad, and whatever you all select, we'll do our best to advise. The documents are significantly different for that kind of a project because you have in the traditional aspect, you have a contract with an architect. They design. They're responsible to the owner for the design for 10 years. The constructor is responsible to the owner by contract to build according to the design as the architect nitpicks it as it goes along. And in the design build, the owner looks to one entity for design and construction issues, and if frequently, not always, but frequently, you're contracting with a constructor who has subcontracted with an architect, right? So the owner has no direct relationship, contractual relationship with the architect. The architect answers to the constructor. So it's not without its challenges. Again, I'm not trying to counterpoint you. I'm just saying I hope you would look at both, come to a decision on both different delivery methods, and it's called delivery method. And there's others too. It's certainly worthy of discussion, and there have been some projects where it's been a cost saver.
Could we have a sheet that gave us the pros and cons of both?
Yes.
I think that would be very
Yeah.
good for all
We've
of
put
us.
something like that together before, so.
Yeah.
My experience when I was on the school board was that we had a construction manager and an architect, largely in the relationship you described, where the construction manager was sort of a overseer of the architect.
They were owner's representatives.
In
is
that
what they were.
relationship.
Yeah.
It worked out well for us. Now, it may not work that well in other places. But we had a situation where we, every so often, would have to either renovate an elementary or build a brand-new one. And we usually pick the construction manager first, then the architect. Now, largely, we dealt with two firms, and they had dealt with each other for decades and continue to, and there's a good relationship there. But we found that that relationship worked for our school system. It may not work that way for others, but knock on wood, we always had a good outcome.
And this is a little unique because it's 3 projects. It's 3 entirely separate projects that are, I don't know what the breakdown is, but the total's in the vicinity of $6 million, I've been told. So it's just a little different than, let's say, the Monon Center. You know, you got one big project, everybody knows exactly what's going on. You had an owner's representative that answered to the 2 units. You had a construction manager that managed an architect and a large number of contractors, and then you could sub-bid it or do a general contractor as well. It's responsible for all the subs. I got to hear a little bit more about the 3 separate projects before I can really formulate what my opinion is, and then your opinion, you 3 and Doug's opinions are the ones that really count, and we'll just try to advise as best we can.
David, do you have the plans? I gave them to Doug.
I don't. I don't like some.
Here's just a point of order, not necessarily a point of order, but in my opinion, we should pass the action item and then move to information and continue this discussion, because our information item is a discussion of the fire construction project. And that way we can get the action item out of the way, which on the table is just passing the resolution, which encourages or allows Doug to formally go and request the interlocal discussion. Fair enough? Is that?
Sure.
Okay.
However you'd like to do it, Mr. Chairman.
Do we want to do it? Call for the question? All those in favor of the passing the action item as stated, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none. Action motion carries 3-0. Now we'll move to information, and now we'll continue the discussion. And I didn't mean to interrupt anybody. I think you were still talking.
I just think we have a set dollar amount, and by advertising it with the dollar amount, we can control costs. We're trying to get a bunch of things built for a set amount of money. And the Station 3 has worked itself into the mix now, and I'm not sure how prudent it is to throw a bunch of money at it for improvements or a remodel when if you've designed, those 2 are identical as they are now. We can transfer the same plans for 4 and 3, which saves a lot of money on design. I mean, they've been the same since 1976 and 82. They can be the same from 2015 forward. I think that we need to have discussion about finding if we're going to maybe rebuilding both of them. I was in 3 the other day, and something that really bothers me, and I'm a civil guy, not a structural guy, but it doesn't take much to see is they've got makeshift attics that the firemen use to their relaxation, quiet time, and everything else. Well, in Station 3, they've got their weight room in an attic, and that terrifies me because I know it's not rated for that, and I don't think that should continue. I think that's bad.
Okay.
I have questions about where the land is coming from. I thought that your research on the land, I think, is a good question.
Well, I think preliminary feedback from the school system is they're not going to come off the land. And I don't know. I know that Doug and Paul have a meeting with the school system coming up, I think. But I don't know if it's worth the time and energy trying to get the land and build something in a retention pond, in a basin, which adds to engineering costs. And Matt had said, Chief Hoffman had said, if it comes down to having to shut down the station for construction, I mean, that's not ideal, but you guys could work with that. And the plans we have are for a rebuild of 4 in the where it is now. So I don't know. I mean, I'm all for trying to get the school to come off, but I also don't want to waste a lot of time on doing it. I mean, if we can move the process along, let's move it along.
I'd be interested in the conversations.
And the other parcel of land is Martin Marietta. Matt has some ideas for using some city property out there. I personally, after walking the site, don't think it's enough land. I would like to see a couple more acres gotten from Martin Marietta. But I don't want, I want to build this as cost effectively as possible. I also don't want to build it wrong. I don't want you to go back 2 years later and say, oh, I wish I had had pull-through bays instead of one-sided bays. If we'd only had 2 more acres, we could have had garage doors on both sides. I don't want any regret on that end.
What are your comments on what we're discussing?
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity. As far as my opinion goes, we're going to be very flexible on this. Like we had discussed, if we're unable to procure land anywhere else other than where Station 4 or even Station 3, but specifically Station 4, we'll find a way to make it work. We'll either set up shop somewhere on a corner of that property while the station is built, or we'll maybe work with the schools to where we can locate our trucks in that bus garage that's across the street, and we just put a construction trailer that we are housed in. We'll find ways to make that situation work. In terms of the project at the 106th and Gray area on the training and the maintenance, again, something that we'll be very flexible on. Obviously, you'll have to come to an agreement with the city as to whether that land can even be used for that. Preliminarily, we have thought that would work, but those have a process which you folks will have to go through. In terms of what I project these costs to be, I really don't know on the training and the maintenance facility. That's kind of a unique building, so I'm not sure. I can go look at other fire stations that were recently built. I know Fisher's built one in the last 2 years. You were probably looking just a little over $200 a square foot for its total space. It's 13,000 square feet. And I'm sorry, I don't know exactly what all equipment is housed there. I don't think it's much more than an engine and an ambulance. And their project, including the land, was about $2.7 million. We would obviously be able to save money because if we reuse the land that we're on, that doesn't cost us anything in terms of buying land, so we won't have that cost to incur. And then I'm not sure that we're going to need 13,000 square feet of station. We might be able to build very nice stations on a smaller footprint than what 13,000 square feet is going to take up. I would be interested in taking a look at the possibility of going below grade for a basement and using that as some sort of usable space, which I think would probably help in the cost as well. So we're very flexible. Those are my preliminary numbers on what I think is a reasonable and safe expectation that the township is going to be looking at in terms of paying for a new facility.
Other questions, Mary?
No.
Matt?
So 200, for the plans that we have in that model, I meant to stop by 4 and grab that 3D model that they have up there. I mean, they've gone as far as they've got a mock-up of of the fire
I'd
station.
like to see that.
At $200 a square foot, based on the plans Cripe had, it would be a $2.4 million building. Did you know if Fisher's tore down a building or if they started? I mean, demolition's usually not that expensive, but.
Do you know if that station was built on site or whether they built on a new site? I was thinking they had built that. That's a brand new site.
You're talking about 96.
Yes. Okay.
Anything else?
Well,
Couple questions, Chief. I know we're just getting started. We don't have numbers yet. We talked about, when Angie discussed at our last meeting, the potential cost and how we might bond this and the timing. I think we all felt like it was desirable to make this somewhat of a cost-neutral project, if at all possible. Obviously, we have bonds that are coming due, maturing, or going off the dole here fairly soon. And then these would come in and we could, cost them over the X number of years and generally, I think it sounds like we could do this at a cost-neutral position. How would that work time-wise? Meaning, if things go like hopefully they will go at roughly the cost that we've kind of bandied around here, when would these facilities, what's the goal to have everything online or stage where we get one station, then the next station, and then the training center? Is there a goal in mind to have everything online?
Not specifically, no. I was kind of waiting to see how this process flowed first. It's obviously, in the past, we have built 2 fire stations at the same time, so that won't be anything new to us. What would be new is housing 2 existing fire crews in temporary quarters.
But 3 only has 2 people, right?
3 has 4 people.
But alternating. The 2 at one time, right?
No, 4 at all, 4
4
at
at
all
all
times.
times.
Yeah, and so there's 12 people that live at that fire station across 3 different shifts. And then there is 18 that work out of Station 4. So we would have to find those accommodations for the time of construction. Whether those are consecutive construction projects or concurrent, again, we'll find ways to make things work. The logistics of it might be a little more difficult if we do it all at one time, but we'll certainly have the pain behind us as quickly as possible if we get it done and over with and we start getting these projects online.
Okay.
Paul, if I could add, I think we'll also
Angie,
take-
microphone.
To the same lines for that, I think we'll also want to look at the financial aspect as well. Because this will be a lease, we won't be able to make any principal payments on that lease during the construction period. So if there are multiple buildings that we can maybe get something accomplished and then move to the next step, that will save on some of the capitalized interest cost. We have to pay interest during that period, but we can't make the actual lease payment. Bondholders still expect some type of payment. So we'd have to actually bond for those initial interest payments during construction. So I think we're going to want to work hand in hand once we get closer to that timeline to figure out the best cost-effective way to cut down on that period as well. The numbers I ran the last time, we had a small piece of capitalized interest, and that was really just to keep the neutral tax rate effect. Once we actually go through and actually put the timeline with the lease structure into place, that may change things a little bit, so we'll want to really tighten up. That's why it was important for me to get a better sense of what the construction dollars look like, so I can start getting a better understanding of how much capital construction dollars may be available. But we'll really want to put our heads together to make sure the timing works out for construction and for your uses as well as financing to keep the cost low. This timeline, I believe, shows closing at the end of the year, which had funds available probably for that spring construction site, was really the kickoff. But those are things I think we'd want to make sure that we've thought through to keep the cost as low as possible as well.
One thing, and Matt, again, I'm tromping into your territory, but it seems to me, Angie, that if we have a goal, or excuse me, a cost in mind of, what would we say, 5.8 million, something like that, $6 million, it seems to me that we ought to build a model for consideration at the 6 million, and then a 10% overrun, and even a 20%. I certainly don't advocate that happens, but it's been known to happen, and see what kind of impact that might have on the tax rate. Hopefully very minor, because I don't want to compromise these building projects solely on cost. I mean, clearly that's the goal, is to keep it under or at the cost goals that we identify, at the same time trying to be as tax neutral as we can. But if it turns out that we need something more for the benefit of the citizens and the fire people, I'm certainly not averse to stepping it up, if you will, cost-wise. So, and I think
Well, if it comes to that, we'd pay cash.
okay, well, because we do have a cash.
do have it.
We have a cash position on this as well. That's a good idea.
I
Okay.
am for doing this I think, I didn't think about what you had to say about only making interest payments. And I know it'd be an inconvenience to you, Matt, but I think that doing this concurrently, you save on a lot. And if we can secure the wasteland at IMI, the construction firm, whatever, can use that as their staging area for both projects. They can bring in materials, house their heavy equipment. It's one mobilization fee, and then they can use that as their dispatch for, both these fire stations will be very similar. So they'll be able to order stone, brick, concrete, everything in bulk. And they can house it out of the wasteland at the Marietta site, assuming we get that. And they can take off on both projects at once, including the training center, which is I kind of want to dial into the training center a little bit, Matt, if we can. I'm envisioning, and tell me if I'm wrong, essentially a large pole barn type building, a little more secure than a pole barn, for training, for all of those cool makeshift training implements you guys have built and created. I'm envisioning maybe 3 or 4 bays for trucks to have maintenance on. I'm envisioning a very rough living quarters for the recruits to know what it's like to spend the night on a facility and do runs, and then maybe some extra structures. Oh, and then a reinforced concrete building that would house all of the technology. And the best part about that site is there's already fiber there. And fiber costs a fortune.
It does, I know.
So they could wire directly into that fiber and do their emergency command, which, by the way, I didn't quite understand until I walked in on it the other day during the flooding a few weeks ago. And they were in a room half the size of this room, or so it appeared, all at a table with probably 10 TVs all next to each other, and you had the street department, the police department, the fire department, various other departments, and they're all trying to, and I now, not that I ever didn't believe there was a need for what you're asking for, but now I saw firsthand that they can't continue to do their emergency response in a conference room.
The other night I was at a table with Carl Mills, and I know he was here last time, and he had some other ideas about financing, and I think we ought to ask him to come back and explain what he was talking about the other night. I'd rather have him say it than try to paraphrase what he was saying.
I thought he was coming this morning.
Well, I did too, but, maybe he had something else he had to do.
All right. Do we have any other discussion on the fire construction project?
Yeah, no.
Can you work on maybe just looking at training centers, kind of like what you want, and maybe getting a price? Because like just off the rough numbers you've given us, it only leaves us, if we were to do both fire stations, it only leave us about $1.5 million to do the training center, and I imagine that, I don't know how much a maintenance garage, I mean, I don't think that costs a whole lot, but I imagine that the reinforced training center and all that probably gets up. So maybe if you could look at some, or tell us what's like some other training facilities or these kind of complexes that you like that we can look at.
Well, the good news about the training facility is that it's less imperative to have a lot of space under roof as opposed to a lot of space out in the open where we can make noise, we can create smoke, we can run saws, we can fire up the fire engines and pump for hours at a time. So really, in terms of training, I don't think that's going to take up a huge chunk of building space. Classrooms, offices will need something like that. But really, and from a maintenance standpoint, I think you'll probably use the building more under roof in terms of maintaining trucks than we would from a training standpoint.
Could those be a combination building?
Yeah, that was the intent,
Oh, okay.
is that they both be housed in the same building. That way they could maximize the space that footprint would take up, killing 2 birds with 1 stone.
And explain what you want out of the response center. Like I'm envisioning just a gray windowless room.
Well, if that's an area that we can do below grade, if that's something that we can build a basement and then house the training and the maintenance on the first floor, all the better.
You want like a bunker situation.
The
so
EOC
that'll
would be below grade, no
hold up to
windows.
Mother Nature.
And it would be away from a lot of the activities that we would be overseeing and
How big,
commanding
are you
from.
thinking a room this big, bigger?
Probably about this, I'm not sure exactly the size of this room. I'm guessing it's, 40 by 40? And I think that's kind of what we have drawn out on our rough sketches of what we'd hope to have someday in terms of an emergency response center.
So maybe a concrete bunker underground, about 40 by 40, and then large open space above that would include some base for maintenance.
Right, yeah. And there might be, it might be a little larger than 40 by 40 once you add offices, planning areas.
Sure. Restroom.
Restrooms, a kitchen facility, because this would be something that would be open for, on large-scale events, it would be open for multiple operational periods. So you would need a means to kind of live there for a little while.
Could they use the recruits bunkhouse for, I mean, if you needed to, if it's a major deal?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that part of it is up to us to design and build however we
You
would
want, sure.
make functional to meet our needs.
There's a company in Florida called Metrowave, and some friends of mine are very involved in it as owners, and it shoots lasers across the city. And once it connects to the building, it goes down through the building, and they can do a telephone and internet service, other than going through cables under the ground. And they have connected with a company to go nationwide, and I'll check into it. They had been talking about Indianapolis in the last few months, and I'll find out if they're going to be doing that, and that might be something that we can have cost on, or what it would cost if they can set that, because it shoots over the city, and what they're doing now is doing the state of Florida. And, you know, when the hurricanes come in, or when the tide comes in, the city of Miami goes underwater, it shuts everything down, and they're shooting over the top, and they're not losing all those connections that they had. So it's really innovative, and I don't know how far along they are in the design of coming up this far, but I'll find out.
Okay. Anybody else? Angie, any other comments? Brian?
May I ask a question? I hadn't heard about the Martin Marietta property. The old environmental lawyer, as soon as he hears wasteland, perks his ears up. What is that?
Well,
like-
I'm not quite sure. I think it's Martin Marietta, but the city had procured land from them, land they were not gonna dig in,
I got you.
that they own.
Okay,
And they've got more, I'm calling it wasteland just because it is to them. They're not gonna
sure.
dig there.
There are no chemicals or dry cleaning
Yeah.
fluids in the ground there.
Right, well, that's just what I
Nothing
was
like
checking
that.
on, because that brings a whole different level of
No,
analysis, so.
it's land on the outskirts of their property that they're not
I got you, I
not
got you.
gonna dig in.
And then, so on our plate on Angie's plate is a model, a finance model that has a 10 and 20% beyond neutral.
I mean, is that crazy asking for that? I mean, I would just be curious if, for some reason, we wanted to step it up.
Things could always go haywire. I'd like to think they won't, but they always can.
They
But I
will.
would like to pay cash.
Most likely will.
If we get cattywampus, we've got cash to cover though.
Yeah, whatever you plan, there'll be a contingency of 10 or 20% anyway, okay? So once you build that in, because there are just unexpected, as you know, unexpected things that occur, and so that will be built into the model and will bring down the amount that's actually available for planned construction. So what you've directed is, okay, just give us one that constructs for that with the contingency
Exactly
built
right.
above that. And then on our end, you've asked for a side-by-side comparison of the design-build method, which is allowed by law, as Matt indicated, and then the traditional design bid build.
Right.
And was there anything else that you were looking for from us?
I don't think so. I think you
Okay.
covered it.
Uh,
Go ahead, Matt.
For you, I don't know when our next meeting is, but I would like to, if we don't, I would like to have a meeting mid-May. I think we need to stay on top of this, and that's up to you.
Debbie, when Doug does crawl out of his deathbed, would you let him know that I think we need to meet in May, to Matt's point, absolutely, and then, stay close to this.
Reinvite all the same players.
By the way, for the
And
public, Doug is not
Yeah.
on his deathbed. He just has a fever, a
Right.
bad fever.
Allegedly,
So
yeah.
Debbie told him not to come around and give all of us a bad fever.
It's very-
I bet you all the firemen are gonna have it. He was really interacting the other night and he looked like it, yeah.
Yeah, maybe I should retract that statement. Doug will recover.
Right.
He's not about to expire. Ladies and gentlemen in the community. Okay, well, thank you. That was excellent. Moving along, financial questions from the board. Do we have any? We certainly
No.
had a few just now.
This was it.
Any board comments? Mary?
I'd just like to thank you again for coming and being here. Brian, for your concise information,
Thank you.
because it's a lot, and I'll be anxious to hear what we come up with for the next meeting. And I thank you, Matt. You've done a lot of exploratory, and we certainly appreciate the information that you've contributed to.
Thank you.
Matt?
Mary kind of brought it up a little earlier. Saturday night was the firefighters awards banquet, and I wish Doug was here, but they did about a 25-minute video on him and recognized him for his years of service since age 19 with the Carmel Fire Department.
Amazing.
And it was very impressive, and we're blessed to have Doug as our trustee, and his knowledge in the fire service will carry a lot of weight as we move forward on these projects.
And I'd like to thank the fire department for taking the time to acknowledge him. He certainly deserved the recognition, and it was a really fine document. Thank you.
And 3 people have been on the Carmel Fire Department now 35 years, 1 person 37 for
Yeah.
25. I mean, that's longevity you don't see anywhere. So kudos to you, Chief, and your staff and department for creating an environment where guys stick around.
That's right.
And we love the kilts.
I would just say, I would echo those comments. I feel bad for Doug. He delivered our board packet the other day. He was really struggling, but, we wish him a speedy recovery. The other thing I would just remind the public is we do have an election coming up on May 6th. Clay Township board members are up for re-election or election. I would encourage anybody to vote, and that's all I want to say about that. Please get out and exercise your right. Announcements, Debbie? Do I have a motion for adjournment?
I so move.
Any second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion's carried. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.